can still taste the iron in the air. The marble beneath my knees is slick with blood. His blood, their blood, mine. Above me, the chandelier sways slightly, its light fractured into sharp, cruel shards that cut through the smoke curling in the room. And there he is, Lorenzo Vitale. His suit jacket is torn, the white of his shirt stained red at the collar. He's standing only a few steps away, like a wolf that's learned to walk on two legs. His hands are in his pockets, but his eyes, those eyes, are the coldest thing I've ever seen. Colder than the rain that's been beating down all night. Colder than the grave. My fingers are wrapped around a gun. My hand is shaking. Not because I'm afraid of him, because I'm afraid of myself. I should kill you, I whisper. My voice sounds nothing like me. It's dry, brittle, foreign. The gun feels heavier than it should. My heartbeat drowns out everything else. He tilts his head, a single slow movement. There's blood on his cheek, but he doesn't wipe it off. Then do it, Lorenzo says quietly. His voice doesn't rise. It doesn't beg. It simply is. Steady, calm, as if he's already accepted whatever comes next. Somewhere behind us, someone screams. It's distant, muffled. The house is burning. I can smell the wood and smoke. But in this moment, it's only him and me. I stare into his face, and for a heartbeat, the night peels away like old paint. I see myself at 18, terrified, standing at the edge of his empire in a plain black uniform, with no memory, no name beyond Elena. I remember his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. I remember the way his presence filled every room, heavy, dangerous, intoxicating. I remember how the walls of his house smelled like money, whiskey, and fear. And I remember how I swore that first night that I'd never let him touch my life. But he did. He touched everything. You destroyed my family, I say. My voice cracks on the word family like glass. Lorenzo's jaw tightens. For the briefest second, something flickers in his eyes. Something human. Then it's gone. Yes, he says. Not an apology, not a defense. Just the truth. He has never lied to me. Not once. That's the worst part. My hands are shaking harder now. The weight of the gun pulls me down. I can feel every heartbeat in my wrists. You killed them. His answer is a single breath. I did. The truth lands like a blade in my chest. It should make everything easier. Simple. I should hate him. I should end it. But nothing is simple with Lorenzo Vitale, because he's also the man who saved me. The man who dragged me out of a life I didn't know was mine. The man who held me when I bled on his floor. The man who made me his without ever asking. He's the monster who built this empire. And somehow, the only place I've ever felt safe. Tears slip down my cheek, hot and silent. They fall onto the cold barrel of the gun. My arm is trembling, my breath shaking in my chest. And then, for the first time that night, Lorenzo moves. He takes a single step closer. My finger tightens on the trigger, but he doesn't flinch. He's looking at me the way only he can. Like he's already decided the ending, no matter what I do. Pull it, Elena, he says softly. If this is how it ends, let it end with your hand. My knees ache against the marble. My lungs burn. The fire is creeping closer. Someone shouts for Lorenzo outside the door, but he doesn't look away from me. God help me, I can't look away from him either. I hate you, I breathe. His mouth curves. Not a smile, not really. A wound in the shape of one. I know. I should hate you more than anything in this world. You should. A pause. Long enough to feel the distance between us dissolve. Long enough for the part of me that still remembers love, the kind that doesn't belong in a place like this, to shatter. You made me into this, I say. You turned me into you. For the first time, he looks like he's bleeding without being touched. He lowers his head, voice rougher now. No, Elena. You were never mine to make. You chose this long before tonight. That's when it hits me. The thing I've been trying to bury since the beginning. I didn't just fall into his world. I stayed. The barrel of the gun drops a fraction. My arms are numb. My chest is heavy. I hate myself for what comes next. I whisper, I couldn't pull the trigger, even if I wanted to. Lorenzo closes the distance between us slowly. His hand reaches for the gun, not to take it, but to curl his fingers over mine. It's the first time I've ever realized how steady his hands are. Steady enough to end wars, or to hold me still. Our foreheads almost touch. The world outside is chaos, but between us, everything is quiet. This is what they'll never understand. He murmurs against my skin. It's not about love. It's about what love costs, and it has cost everything. I let the gun fall. It hits the floor with a soft, final sound. The moment it does, there's no turning back. Lorenzo pulls me into his arms like he's claiming something already his. His heart is beating steady against mine. Calm, terrifyingly calm. And I don't resist. Because this is who I am now. Elena Moreau, daughter of the dead. The rose in the empire of ash and smoke. The woman who fell in love with the monster who killed her family. This is not a love story. This is a confession. The night I chose him was the night I buried everything else. I remember the night I first saw the house. I was standing in front of the wrought iron gates with a duffel bag that wasn't even mine. The air smelled like the kind of rain that never stops. Cold, metallic, endless. The driver who brought me here didn't say a word. He simply pointed at the guardhouse and left, as if this place devoured words the moment they touched the air. There it was. Vitale Estate, a palace dressed in shadows. The windows were lit, but the light felt wrong. Too still, too silent, like it didn't belong to a home, but a temple built for something darker. I'd been through foster homes, shelters, and institutions. None of them felt like this. None of them looked like something that could watch you back. The gates opened with a low groan, as if even steel was afraid to wake whatever slept inside. I told myself this was just another job, just another paycheck, just a house. But the truth was already curling in the pit of my stomach. Nothing about this place was just anything. Sophia met me at the door. She was older, tall, with hair the color of winter ash pulled into a tight bun. Everything about her face was precise. Not cruel, not kind, just exact. A woman who had seen too much and was still standing. Elena Moreau? She asked, not to confirm, but to test how my name fit in her mouth. Yes. My voice sounded small against the high walls of the entryway. Follow me. No welcome, no smile, just 2 words and the soft click of her heels on marble. I followed her through hallways lined with portraits I didn't recognize. Faces of men in dark suits, their eyes painted with an uncanny precision. They stared down like silent judges, and for a moment, I wondered if Lorenzo Vitale himself had ordered it that way, to remind everyone who truly owned this house. And then I realized, of course he did. We reached a small staff wing. Sophia handed me a plain black uniform. Dress, apron, shoes polished so sharp they reflected the ceiling lights. You work when the house wakes. You disappear when it sleeps. Don't speak unless spoken to. Don't ask questions. Don't touch anything upstairs. Her tone wasn't harsh. It was carved from stone. I nodded. Good, she said. If you follow the rules, this place will forget you exist. That's the best you can hope for here, I wanted to ask. What happens if I don't? But I didn't. I started that night. The kitchen smelled faintly of lemon and bleach. Everything gleamed. Even the silence felt polished. The other house staff didn't look at me much. Quick nods, short instructions, a pair of hands showing me where the clean towels went, how to fold napkins with corners sharp enough to cut. It was all mechanical. And mechanical was safe. If I moved fast enough, thought little enough, maybe I could survive this place like I survived everything else, by disappearing inside the routine. Then I heard it. The gunshot. Just one. Dull and heavy, like thunder trapped indoors. Someone screamed. The woman beside me froze. Someone dropped a tray. A glass shattered on tile. But no one ran. No one even whispered. Sophia's voice was quiet but firm. Keep working. I started. Keep working. I did. But my hands were shaking as I folded another white napkin, as if the blood had already soaked through it before I even touched it. That was the first night I learned what kind of house this really was. Later, when the hallways had emptied and the other maids had disappeared into their rooms, I stepped out into the corridor leading to the main staircase. The air was colder here, heavier, like it didn't want me breathing it. And there he was, Lorenzo Vitale. I didn't know his name yet, but I knew. Everyone knew. He was standing at the base of the grand staircase, surrounded by men in black suits. One of them was wiping blood from his hands. Another was dragging a body, a man, young, pale, across the marble, leaving a streak that looked almost artistic against the white stone. Lorenzo wasn't holding a weapon, but he didn't need one. His presence was the weapon. He had the kind of face that could have belonged to a saint if God had been cruel enough to make one out of fire and ruin. Sharp jaw, dark hair falling carelessly against his forehead, eyes so steady they burned. He looked up, and for a moment I forgot to breathe. Not because he was handsome, though he was, in a way that felt dangerous to even think about, but because in that single glance, I felt like my entire life had been pulled apart and laid out in front of him. Who's that? His voice was low, but it wasn't really a question. Sophia appeared beside me like a shadow. New girl. Elena, his eyes lingered on me, just long enough for heat to crawl up the back of my neck. Get her out of my sight. Just like that, he turned away. The men obeyed without speaking. That night, I lay awake in my narrow bed, staring at the ceiling that smelled faintly of disinfectant and old wood. The sound of the gunshot replayed in my skull, the streak of blood across the floor. His eyes. Lorenzo Vitale. I whispered his name in the dark, as if saying it out loud might anchor it to something real. I didn't sleep, not really, because I already knew the truth. The same truth everyone here carried like a stone in their chest. This wasn't a house. This was a kingdom. And Lorenzo Vitale was the king. Days bled together after that. Wake before dawn. Polish silverware, fold linen, clean surfaces that were already clean. I moved like a ghost through rooms built for monsters. The rules were simple. Follow them, and the house wouldn't notice you. Break them, and the house would swallow you whole. I tried to stay invisible, but Lorenzo had a way of seeing through walls. The first time he spoke to me, really spoke, was 4 nights later. It was after a gathering, something big, judging by the expensive cars that lined the drive. I'd been sent upstairs with a silver tray of glasses, careful not to breathe too loudly, careful not to exist. The doors to the study were slightly open. I shouldn't have stopped. But I did. Inside, Lorenzo sat in a leather chair, his sleeves rolled up, the top buttons of his black shirt undone. A man knelt in front of him, bleeding, bruised, terrified. Lorenzo leaned forward slowly, like a lion deciding whether to play with its food or end it. You had one job, he said quietly. No shouting, no threats, just certainty. The man whimpered something I couldn't hear. Lorenzo sighed. That's the problem with loyalty. It's only real until it hurts. Then he drew the gun. The sound was soft, clean, one shot. The man collapsed. Blood spread across the Persian rug like ink in water. I clamped a hand over my mouth to keep from making a sound. His head turned. Our eyes met through the crack in the door. It felt like being pinned in place by something ancient and unmerciful. "Elena," he said. He remembered my name. "Come in." My pulse hammered against my ribs, but my feet moved before my mind did. The tray was steady in my hands, only because I was too terrified to shake. I stepped into the room. He set the gun down on the desk as casually as someone setting aside a pen. His gaze never left me. He wasn't trying to scare me. He didn't have to. "Pour me a drink." My fingers were clumsy, but I did it. Whiskey, 3 fingers, just like Sophia had taught me. When I handed it to him, his fingertips brushed mine. Just barely. Enough to make my breath catch. He took a slow sip, watching me over the rim of the glass. "Do you know why that man died?" I shook my head. Because he talked when he shouldn't have. He thought he mattered. His voice was almost kind. "In this house, no one matters unless I say so." Then, almost gently, "Do you matter, Elena?" I swallowed hard. "No." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Good." He dismissed me with a flick of his fingers, and I fled like someone who'd just survived a storm she didn't see coming. That night, I sat on the floor of my tiny room with my knees pulled to my chest. I told myself I hated him, that I'd never speak to him again, that I'd quit and leave before sunrise. But I didn't. Because fear, once it seeps into your skin, doesn't let you run. It makes you build walls. It makes you stay. And maybe some small, broken part of me wanted to see him again. It wasn't just fear. It was something else. Something that felt like a hand pressed to my chest, holding me exactly where I stood. The house began to breathe around me. I could feel its pulse. Meetings at odd hours. Trucks arriving at night. Men vanishing without a trace. The staff whispered, but only in hallways they thought were safe. Sophia caught me listening once. "You're smarter than most," she said quietly. "That'll get you killed here." I wanted to ask her why she stayed, but the look in her eyes told me she wouldn't answer. A week passed. 2. I learned to keep my head down, but I couldn't forget his voice. His eyes. That quiet cruelty that didn't need to shout. He was everywhere. In the way people moved, the way they didn't speak unless he'd left the room. Lorenzo Vitale was less a man and more a gravitational pull. You either orbited him or burned. One night, after everyone else had gone to bed, I found myself walking the upper hallways. I shouldn't have been there. The staff wing was off limits after midnight. But something pulled me forward. Maybe it was the silence. Maybe it was the strange familiarity of this place I couldn't explain. Or maybe it was the part of me that had always been drawn to danger like a moth to a flame. The hallway ended at a balcony that overlooked the main staircase. Below, in the pool of warm light, Lorenzo stood alone. He wasn't wearing the mask he wore around his men. His hands were in his pockets, head tilted back slightly, as if he was listening to something only he could hear. For the first time, he didn't look invincible. He looked tired. That was the moment I realized. Monsters get tired too. They just bleed in silence. I turned to leave, but the floor creaked under my shoe. He looked up. "Elena." Hearing my name in that voice felt like standing at the edge of a cliff. I froze. "What are you doing here?" I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. He didn't move closer. He didn't need to. "Curiosity," he said softly, "gets people killed here." I know. A beat of silence. "That's why you're still breathing." I should have been terrified. Maybe I was. But something in his tone, the way he said it, like a secret, made my chest tighten in a way fear couldn't explain. "Go back to your room, Elena." I did, but his voice followed me all the way down the hallway, wrapping around my throat like silk and smoke. Weeks later, I would look back at that night and understand. That was the beginning. Not the gunshot, not the blood. It was the way he said my name in the dark, like it belonged to him. I didn't fall in love with Lorenzo Vitale in one moment. I slid toward him slowly, like a drop of ink spreading through water. And by the time I realized it, he had already filled every corner of my world. But I didn't know that then. All I knew was that the gates had closed behind me. And this time, no one was coming to let me out. The house had its own language. It spoke in creaks and whispers, in the hum of generators deep underground, in the way the staff held their breath when Lorenzo entered a room, like the air itself bowed to him. I had learned how to move through it without making a sound. Wake early, work quietly, never, ever look too long. But curiosity is a disease that doesn't die easy, especially when the house you live in feels like it's watching you back. It started with a door I wasn't supposed to see, a narrow one hidden behind a heavy curtain at the far end of the east wing. I'd been carrying a tray of clean towels, just another quiet, obedient maid making her rounds. But when I brushed against the curtain, my hand grazed the cold edge of a doorknob. My pulse stuttered. I don't know why I stopped. Maybe some part of me already knew. Maybe the house itself was waiting. I pushed the fabric aside. The door was old, carved wood, dark as dried blood. There was no keyhole, no obvious lock. Just a black iron handle that felt colder than it should have been. I should have walked away. Instead, I opened it. The hallway beyond was narrow and unlit, like a throat swallowing me whole. The air smelled faintly of dust and ink. I stepped inside without really deciding to. Each step echoed like it belonged to someone else. The room at the end wasn't large, a library maybe, or an archive. Shelves lined the walls, filled not with books but with files, boxes, and old photographs in plastic sleeves. A single desk sat in the center, a lamp throwing a thin circle of light. I ran my fingers along a stack of folders. Names, dates, numbers, some in Italian, some in English, some stamped, classified in faded ink. One folder lay open on the desk. I shouldn't have looked, but I did. The photo was of a man and a woman, early 40s, dark hair, kind eyes. They were standing in front of a fountain somewhere, laughing. The woman's hand rested on a little girl's shoulder. Her hair was tied in a ribbon. Her smile was toothy and uneven. I couldn't breathe, because that little girl was me. My knees nearly gave out. I gripped the edge of the desk to keep from collapsing. The names below the photo read, Victor Moreau and Isabel Moreau. The blood roared in my ears. I didn't remember much about my childhood, but I remembered the sound of gunfire. I remembered a woman's voice screaming my name. I remembered running barefoot through wet grass in the dark. And now I was standing in the house of the man who commanded armies in silence, staring at the faces of the parents I had lost. The room tilted around me. My hands trembled as I flipped through the file. Undercover operatives, priority targets, terminated. I heard the door click behind me. Elena. His voice was low, not a shout, not a warning, just a shadow sliding into the room. Lorenzo Vitale stood in the doorway, black shirt half unbuttoned, sleeves rolled up like always. Like he'd just come from dealing with someone else's fate. He didn't look surprised to see me. He never did. My fingers clenched the folder so tightly the paper crumpled. I was just... I stammered, the lie choking on my tongue. You were just somewhere you shouldn't be, he said softly. No anger, no raised voice. That made it worse. His calm was a blade. He crossed the room slowly, unhurried, like a predator who's already decided you're not going anywhere. The sound of his footsteps was louder than my own heartbeat. "Who told you about this room?" "No one," I whispered. "Then how did you find it?" I swallowed hard. "I didn't mean to." His gaze flicked to the open file, then back to my face. For a moment, the mask slipped. Just a fraction. Something dark and dangerous stirred in his eyes. "You shouldn't have seen this," Lorenzo said. My throat went dry. "Who were they?" Silence stretched between us like a wire pulled too tight. "They were no one," he said at last. But it wasn't true. I could hear it in the way the word cracked at the edges. "They're my parents," I said. My voice was shaking, but the words came out anyway. "Victor and Isabel Moreau." "Why are there files in your house?" Lorenzo's jaw tightened. His hands slipped into his pockets. Not a casual gesture, but one that said control. He was measuring every breath, every word. "Because everything that matters in this city passes through my house," he replied. "That's not an answer. I don't owe you one." It was the first time he spoke to me like that. Not as an employee, not as a possession, but as a threat. I forced myself to meet his gaze. "Did you know them?" His silence told me everything. My hands curled around the folder like a shield. "You can't be here," he said finally, stepping closer. The scent of smoke and cedar clung to him like a second skin. "This room doesn't exist." "Not for you? Not for anyone? Then why keep it?" I asked. "Why keep this?" For a heartbeat, something flickered in his eyes. Something dangerously close to pain. Then it vanished. "Because some ghosts are better kept on a leash," he murmured. His hand closed over mine, prying the folder from my fingers. His skin was warm, steady. Everything about him was steady. It made my own trembling feel louder. He didn't look at the file again. He just shut it, slid it into a drawer, and turned the key. "This never happened, Elena." He led me out of the room without another word. I didn't fight him. My legs wouldn't have carried me if I tried. He didn't touch me roughly. He didn't need to. The air around him did the work. When we reached the hallway, he stopped. Lorenzo looked down at me, and for the first time since I'd met him, he didn't look like a god. He looked like a man holding the weight of something no one else could touch. "You don't understand the world you've stepped into," he said quietly. "You don't want to." "Maybe I already did a long time ago," I whispered. His jaw tightened. He leaned in just enough for his breath to brush my ear. "Then stop digging, Elena. Before you find something you can't put back." I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake in my narrow bed, staring at the crack in the ceiling, replaying the way his voice slid into my veins like smoke. I should have been terrified. I was, but beneath the fear was something far more dangerous. A gnawing hunger to know. Who were Victor and Isabel Moreau? Why were they in his files? Why did Lorenzo look at me like that, as if my existence was both a wound and a weapon? The next morning, Sophia noticed the shadows under my eyes. She didn't ask. She never asked questions she didn't want the answers to. But as she handed me a stack of linens, she said quietly, "Be careful where your eyes wander in this house." I pretended not to understand. She didn't pretend to believe me. 3 days passed. Nothing changed, and everything did. Lorenzo didn't mention the file room again. Neither did I. But something invisible had shifted between us. A wire strung tight across a chasm. Every time he walked into the same room as me, I felt it hum in my chest. The next Friday night, the house filled with strangers. Businessmen, politicians, men in suits who smiled too easily. Their laughter echoed down the halls, polished and false. I served champagne, kept my head down, pretended I was nothing. But Lorenzo saw me. He always saw me. "Come here," he said later that night. His voice was low, cutting through the noise like smoke. I froze, tray balanced in my hands. A few of the men turned their heads, curiosity flickering like moths around a flame. "Now," Lorenzo added. I walked toward him on autopilot. He was standing near the staircase, glass of whiskey in hand, tie loose around his throat. He looked like Sin dressed in silk. He took the tray from me and set it on a table without looking. Then he leaned down just enough for no one else to hear. "You've been quiet," he murmured. "That usually means trouble." "I've been working. You've been thinking." My pulse jumped. His smile didn't touch his eyes. "Stop," he whispered. "Whatever answers you're looking for, they won't save you." He turned away to greet someone else, leaving me standing there with his words burning through my skin. He was warning me, but it wasn't a threat. Not entirely. It was something worse. A promise. That night, I walked past the east wing again. The curtain was still there. The door was still closed. But the air around it felt heavier, like the house itself remembered what I'd seen. I pressed my fingers to the fabric and forced myself to walk away. I told myself I'd forget the names, forget the faces, forget the way Lorenzo's voice cracked on a single word. I lied. 2 weeks later, I would return to that door. And when I did, everything I thought I knew about this house, about him, would shatter. But that night, lying alone in the dark, I made a quiet, stupid promise to myself. I would find the truth, no matter what it cost. And somewhere in the silence, I swear I could still hear his voice, soft and unshakable. This never happened, Elena. But it did. And I would never be the same again. The night it happened, the rain was louder than usual. Lorenzo once said that rain was good for business. No one questions gunshots when thunder drowns them out. I didn't sleep much anymore. Sleep had become a luxury for people who didn't know they were living inside a wolf's den. For me, nights were something else entirely. A time when the house changed its skin, when whispers traveled faster, and shadows learned to move. I was on the second floor, wiping down the already immaculate banister for the third time. My hands worked, but my mind wasn't there. It was still in that hidden room, still staring at the faces of Victor and Isabel Moreau, still hearing his voice. "This never happened, Elena. Lies have a way of becoming cages." I didn't hear the footsteps until they were close. Marco D'Amato appeared at the top of the stairs, tall, sharp, and constantly scanning the room like he'd been born suspicious of the world. "Why are you still awake?" His voice was low, flat, not unfriendly, but trained never to give anything away. "I work here," I answered. He gave me a long look. "Not at this hour." "I couldn't sleep." Marco sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Then stay in your room." "Don't wander tonight. He's expecting someone he didn't need to say the name. It hung in the air like gun smoke. Downstairs, the front doors opened. I didn't have to see it to know it was him. Lorenzo Vitale didn't enter rooms. Rooms adjusted to his presence. The atmosphere shifted the way a forest goes silent when a predator walks through. I leaned over the railing and saw him below. Black suit, no tie, hair damp from the rain. A group of men trailed behind him, armed, sharp, forgettable. But Lorenzo wasn't forgettable. He was the storm everyone else tried to survive. He didn't look up, but somehow I knew he knew I was there. Hours passed. Voices murmured behind the closed doors of the study. I told myself to go to my room, pretend to sleep, be the ghost I was supposed to be. But something held me there. It was almost 2 in the morning when the air shifted again. The conversation below ended. Footsteps scattered. Men left through the front doors like shadows melting back into the rain. Then came the silence. Too clean. Too perfect. It was the kind of silence that usually came before something broke. I heard it first. A metallic click, too soft for most people to notice. But I'd grown up in a world that taught me to listen to danger before it spoke. There were footsteps on the roof. Not Lorenzo's men. He kept them off the upper floors at night. My heart thudded once, then again, harder. I didn't think. I moved, down the hallway, around the corner, past the staff wing and into the eastern corridor, the one I wasn't supposed to use. The old wooden floorboards groaned under my weight. I pressed myself against the wall near the stairwell and looked down. Lorenzo was alone. He stood at the base of the staircase, his back to the door, rolling his sleeves up with slow, deliberate movements. He looked calm, too calm. Above him, through the high windows, I caught the faint reflection of something moving on the balcony rail. A glint. Metal. Someone was here. My body moved before my brain caught up. I crept down the stairs, silent, careful. The house wasn't just familiar anymore. It was something I understood. Every step had a sound. Every shadow had a corner. My hand closed around the edge of the iron banister. And then, everything happened at once. The figure leapt down from the balcony, a flash of black, a blade in his hand. Lorenzo turned, just slightly, but not fast enough. He didn't see what I saw. I didn't scream. Screaming is for people who think someone will save them. I ran. I collided with the man midair. It wasn't graceful, just desperate. We crashed into the floor together. The knife sliced the air where Lorenzo had been standing. For a heartbeat, I couldn't breathe. The stranger's elbow dug into my chest as he twisted, reaching for me. His eyes were black holes. No hesitation. No fear. He didn't care who I was. He wasn't here for me. He was here to kill Lorenzo. I grabbed his wrist with both hands. He was stronger, but desperation can be stronger than muscle. His blade grazed my arm. Hot pain bloomed, but I didn't let go. I screamed, not for help, but from the shock of it. Then Lorenzo was there. He grabbed the man by the collar, slamming him against the marble column. The impact was so violent I felt it in my teeth. The blade clattered across the floor. I pushed myself back, chest heaving, blood seeping through the fabric of my sleeve. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. Lorenzo didn't shout. He didn't make a sound. He just looked at the man like someone considering whether a bug was worth crushing. The intruder spat blood on the floor. "You'll fall, Vitale," he hissed in broken Italian. "Not tonight," Lorenzo said. And then he shot him. A single shot. No hesitation. No mercy. The body crumpled beside me. For a moment, the only sound in the room was my breathing. Fast, uneven, too loud. Lorenzo turned toward me. "Elena." Just my name. But in his mouth, it was different. It wasn't a warning or an order this time. It sounded like something else entirely. I was sitting on the floor, back against the cold marble. Blood trickled down my arm in thin, warm lines. He crouched in front of me, and for the first time since I met him, there was no distance between us. "Where are you hurt?" he asked. "It's nothing," I lied. He caught my wrist, gently but firmly, and lifted my arm. His thumb brushed over the cut, not tender, not cruel, just there. Lorenzo Vitale's touch wasn't supposed to feel human, but it did. "You're bleeding," he said softly. I noticed. Something like a laugh almost broke through him. Quiet, brief, gone as soon as it came. I stared at him, at the man who'd just killed someone without blinking, at the man whose hands were still warm from pulling a trigger. And for some reason, I wasn't afraid of him in that moment. I was afraid of how calm I felt. "You're reckless," he murmured. "I saved your life." He tilted his head. "No, you got between me and a bullet that wasn't meant for you." "It was a knife." "Doesn't matter." His gaze held mine for a beat too long. I should have looked away. I didn't. "I didn't ask you to save me," he said quietly. "You didn't have to." For the first time, something inside him shifted. I could almost hear it. A small, quiet crack in the armor that wrapped around Lorenzo Vitale like a second skin. Marco stormed in a few seconds later with 2 other men. They froze at the sight of the body, then at me, sitting on the floor with Lorenzo crouched in front of me. "What the hell happened?" Marco barked. Lorenzo didn't turn. "Clean it up." The men moved without another word. "Get her patched up," Marco said, but Lorenzo's voice cut through his. "I'll take care of it." The room went still. Marco's brows knitted. He hesitated, which for him was a miracle, but he didn't argue. "Understood." The men dragged the body away, leaving a dark streak across the floor. I watched it fade into the shadows, feeling the edges of my reality bend. Lorenzo helped me up. His hand on my arm was steady, grounding, dangerous. "You should have stayed in your room," he said. "And let you die?" He didn't answer. He led me through a narrow hallway I'd never walked before. It ended in a private room, small, dark wood, shelves lined with books and whiskey bottles. A single lamp threw a soft gold circle over the leather couch. "This is your office," I whispered. He ignored that. He guided me to sit, then disappeared for a moment. When he came back, he was holding a first aid kit. I stared at him as he knelt in front of me and cleaned the wound himself. Not Sophia, not Marco. Him. He wrapped the bandage around my arm with practiced precision. His touch was firm, steady, the way someone holds something they could easily break. "Why did you do that?" he asked suddenly. "What?" "Run toward a man with a knife." "I don't know." He looked up, eyes steady, dangerous. "Yes, you do." I swallowed. "Because I didn't want to watch you die." For a second, a fragile, terrifying second, he forgot how to breathe too. I saw it in the way his hands stilled. "You don't understand what you've done," he whispered. "Then explain it." His jaw tightened. He leaned back slightly, creating space between us that didn't feel like space at all. "You don't save people like me, Elena. You survive us, or you don't." He stood then, pouring himself a drink at the bar without asking if I wanted one. Lorenzo wasn't the kind of man who asked anything. He commanded the world, and it obeyed. I sat there, clutching my bandaged arm, feeling the weight of something irreversible settle over me. I had crossed a line, not just in the marble hall, inside him. "Who sent him?" I asked quietly. Lorenzo didn't look at me. "Raphael Rossi." The name sat heavy in the air. I'd heard it before, whispered in the kitchen, spit like poison. "He wants you dead?" "He wants everything I built," Lorenzo said. "Killing me is just the fastest way." "And if he'd succeeded?" He turned then, leaning against the counter, glass in hand. The lamplight carved his face into something sharp and unreadable. "Then this house would have burned by morning," he said. I stared at the glass in his hand, at the blood that had already dried on his cuff. I thought of the way his voice had wrapped around my name when he crouched in front of me, the way he'd looked at me like I was both a mistake and something he couldn't quite let go of. "Why did you bring me here, Lorenzo?" I asked. His smile was faint, hollow. "I didn't. The world did, and I just didn't let it take you back." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one I have." Silence. Outside, the rain hit the windows like a heartbeat. Inside, Lorenzo Vitale, the man who ruled this house with blood and fear, stood a few feet away, looking at me like I'd just broken a rule even he didn't know he had. He finished his drink and set it down. Then he crossed the room, slow and deliberate, until he was standing in front of me again. He didn't touch me. He didn't need to. "You shouldn't matter," he said softly. "Then why do I?" For a moment his eyes closed, just for a heartbeat, and then he said the truth. "I don't know." He left after that. No warning, no order, just silence. But the moment hung in the room like smoke that refused to clear. I sat there, staring at the bandage on my arm, listening to the rain hammer against the windows. I thought of the blade, the gunshot, his voice. Something had changed tonight. I wasn't just another ghost in the walls anymore. I wasn't invisible. And that terrified me more than the blood on the floor. Because men like Lorenzo Vitale don't protect people. They claim them. And whether I wanted it or not, a piece of me had just been claimed. I didn't mean to fall asleep in his office. After the knife, after the shot, after the bandage cinched around my arm with his steady hands. He left, the door clicked, and I told myself I'd get up, go back to the staff wing, pretend none of it had happened. I closed my eyes for a breath. When I opened them, the clock had moved 2 hours, and my skin was burning. The fever came on like a storm. Heat pulsing behind my eyes, the room tilting, books swimming along the walls like fish. I sat up too fast. The couch heaved under me. I pressed my palm to the cut, felt the dull throb of my own pulse answering in the wound, and finally stood. The corridor outside was empty, the house quiet in the careful way it becomes when it's tired of pretending to be a home. I walked toward the staff wing, counting my steps like I always did. 11 to the corner, 8 to the service door, 14 down the narrow hall. The numbers steadied me. They didn't hold long. By the time I reached my room, my hands were shaking so hard I could barely turn the handle. I lay down without undressing, my cheek against the cool pillow, and told myself to breathe. Heat, blackness, a taste like pennies, and then voices that didn't belong to this house. "Elle!" A woman's voice, cut short by the sound of a door slamming. "I've got her, Vic." Go a man breathing hard, the rustle of paper. "If they breach the east fence, we don't have time to burn the files." "Then we lose the files." The woman again, closer now, the syllables shaped around my name, a name I hadn't heard since childhood and yet knew down to the bone. "We don't lose her." Her. Hands. Strong. Capable. Someone tying my shoelaces with a speed that comes from practice. A kiss pressed into my hair. The scent of soap and coffee, and a cheap aftershave that breaks my heart because I can't put a face to it. The window shatters. The world becomes light and sound and smoke. I sat up screaming. The ceiling above me was cracked and harmless. The door didn't budge. No one was coming through the window. I pressed my hands to my face and waited for my breath to stop hurting. It didn't. I remembered nothing and too much. A woman's voice saying my name the way only a mother can. A man's shoes pounding tile. The rattle of a chain-link gate. And a symbol burned into the back of my eyes. A laurel wreath split by a single downward dagger. It took me a minute to understand why it made me shake. I had seen that mark here, not carved into wood or painted on a wall, but stitched in black thread into the inside of one of Lorenzo's tailored jackets. A detail so discreet it could be mistaken for a tailor's signature. Not a signature, a flag. I stood up. The fever rode my spine. I told myself to lie down again. I didn't. I walked. Out of the staff wing, down the dim corridor, past the little chapel where no one prayed. To the east wing, the heavy curtain, the cold handle that always felt 2 degrees below the rest of the house, as if the air inside didn't agree with the air out here. The door opened. The light in the archive hit me like a slap. I shut it off, closed my eyes until the room settled, then turned the lamp on low. The desk looked the same. The shelves looked the same. The box with my parents' file was where he had slid it. I took it out with both hands and set it down. Victor Moreau. Isabel Moreau. The photographs were suddenly cruelly clear. The fountain. The ribbon in the little girl's hair. My smile wide and unguarded in a way I couldn't locate in my own face anymore. The fever softened the edges of the papers until they seemed to move. I pressed my fingers into the page to make everything still. There were reports I hadn't seen before. A second folder inside the first, tucked beneath a sheaf of receipts and dates. Operation, Orpheus. Status, compromised. Primary, Vitale Council, Northern Arm. Counterintelligence infiltration confirmed. Assets, V. Moreau, deep cover, I. Moreau, deep cover. Directive, neutralize, leak. Collateral, minimize non-combatant exposure. My stomach dropped through the floor. Below the header, a list of dates, a location pin, a safe house 3 streets from a park I suddenly remembered. The one with chipped blue swings and a rusted carousel that squealed in winter. Everything went quiet inside me in the way it does when the truth is too large. I turned the page. Debrief excerpt, translated, contact compromised, order given, 2 shots, close range, target confirmation by sigil, child located, removed. I didn't realize I was standing until my knees hit the chair and scraped wood. My hands left damp crescents on the paper where they shook. The words wouldn't hold still. They crawled. I heard his footsteps before I heard the door. Elena. I didn't turn. If I looked at him now, I would either run or break, and I didn't know which frightened me more. He didn't fill the doorway. He occupied it. There's a difference. I felt it in the way the light changed, in the way my own body decided to breathe shallower. I told you, he said softly, and there was no triumph in it, only weariness. This room doesn't exist. It exists enough to hold my parents' death warrant. Silence. Then, the faintest exhale. Close the file. Did you give the order? My voice came out hoarse. I wasn't sure when I'd started crying. The words blurred and cleared, blurred again. Tell me, did you give the order to kill Victor and Isabel Moreau? He didn't lie. He never did. Yes. 1 syllable. The least a man can say. You, I said, and the syllable bent under its own weight. You signed it. My hand delivered it, he said. My counsel ratified it. It was not done lightly, I repeated, and tasted blood where I bit the inside of my cheek to stay upright. How considerate. A muscle moved in his jaw. The line of his shoulders held. He stepped into the room and shut the door. The tiny click of the latch echoed like a verdict. Look at me, he said. I did. It took work. He looked the way he always looked. Black shirt, sleeves rolled, eyes steady, mouth a line cut with a blade. But something was wrong with the edges, as if the man had been sanded down, and what remained was only the structure that couldn't be smoothed away. Do you want me to beg? He asked quietly. So you can hate me more easily? I don't need you to beg. Do you want me to tell you I'm sorry? I want you to tell me the truth. The truth, he said, is not a single thing. He reached past me, not touching, careful, to close the folder and slide it toward the edge of the desk, like a dangerous instrument being set aside. Your parents were not targets because they were yours, he said. They were targets because they were mine. My parents weren't yours. Everyone is mine in this city, or they die for pretending they aren't. I could have hit him. I didn't. The sudden desire to do violence startled me, because I had never been that person. The fever shivered through me again. He saw it. "You're burning!" "Don't touch me." He didn't. His fingers hovered in the air for a half-second, and then lowered again. "Raphael had a man inside my council," he said. "A leak that cost us bodies and border points, and a shipment that started a war I didn't want. We chased it for months. We cut off arms and watched them grow back someplace else. Every time we were sure we had it, it disappeared. And then your parents appeared where nothing ever appears by accident. You broke into a safe house and murdered a family." He didn't flinch. "I gave a counterintelligence directive to end a leak that would have taken 50 more people to their graves if I waited. We didn't know there was a child there." "That's the truth you asked for." My throat hurt. "Then what?" He closed his eyes for a breath. When he opened them, the edges were worse. "I found you in a pantry full of canned peaches?" You were holding a plastic ballerina. Her arm was broken. The floor wavered. The memory hit so hard I tasted the sugar on my tongue. There had been a ballerina. Pink, cheap, one arm snapped. I had carried her like a talisman through a fevered landscape I didn't have words for. "How kind," I said, and hated how the shame welling up in me sounded like prayer. "You saved the child after killing the parents." "I pulled you out of a burning room before the men I pay to clean my messes could get their hands on you," he said, voice roughening for the first time. "I altered your file. I paid the nurse at the clinic who stitched the cut on your scalp to lose the tape with your name on it. I sent you to a church 2 towns away with a false surname and a bank account that kept your shoes on your feet and your bones warm in winter. And I never touched that account again because I wanted you to grow somewhere my shadow didn't reach." "You're telling me you rescued me?" I said. Each syllable was a blade I set on my own tongue. "I am telling you," Lorenzo said, "that I made sure you didn't die for something you didn't choose, and that I have been punished for that choice every day you've lived in my house." The room lurched. My palms found the desk. I relished the sting where a splinter pressed skin. "You have no right," I whispered. "To what?" "To make a story out of their deaths that centers you. I am not the center. I am the cause." He said it the way some men say grace. "Why bring me here?" I asked. "If you wanted me to live outside your shadow, why hire me? Why put me under your roof? Why let me see the way you make the world kneel?" "I didn't hire you." The faintest curve tugged his mouth and died there. "Sophia did. She needed hands that didn't steal. You walked in with a spine and a way of looking at walls like you could make them tell you what they'd heard. I told her you wouldn't last a week. And then? And then you learned the house in 3 days and never flinched when it showed its teeth." He studied me as if the present tense were a risk. "And then I heard you say my name when you thought you were alone." Heat climbed my throat that had nothing to do with fever. I hated him for knowing that. I hated myself for letting him. "Say you aren't sorry again," I said. "Say it so I can leave." "I won't tell you. I'm sorry for making a decision that saved more lives than it took. I will tell you that if there had been any world in which your parents walked out of that house, I would have burned the city to build it." The fever brightened everything until it looked like day. "Get out," I said, "or I will." He watched me for a long time. Not the way a predator watches prey, but the way a man evaluates what he's about to lose and decides he deserves the losing. "Don't run," he said softly. "Not like this. Not into a night Raphael has filled with teeth." "Then don't close the door," I said, pushing past him, the file under my arm, because I couldn't leave it, not again. "Because I will hate you if you lock it." He didn't. I made it as far as the front hall before the world tilted for real. The stairs rotated under me. I reached for the banister and missed. The marble came up faster than I could stop it. Hands caught me before the impact. I knew those hands by now. They never shook. "Let me go," I said into his shirt. He didn't. "You're not leaving this house with a fever." "I left it once," I said, "and somehow I still ended up here." He gathered me as if I weighed nothing. I hated how natural it felt to be carried by the man who had rewritten the geography of my life without permission. "I'm not your problem," I muttered. "You became my problem the night I signed a piece of paper that put your name into the world again," he said. "And the first rule of this house is that I fix my problems." "What's the second?" His breath moved at my temple. "There are no problems I don't fix." He took me not to the staff wing, not to the infirmary the men used when bullets found their way home, but to a room I hadn't seen. Small, high window, a bed too large for a guest, a chair worn in the way furniture gets worn by a single person who needs it more than they admit. "What is this?" I asked as he set me down. "Somewhere you can be sick without being scared." You need sleep," he said, "and water. And to put the dead down for one night, I can't." "You can," he said. "You just don't want to, because hating me feels cleaner than being empty." The fever ripped a laugh out of me. It sounded like someone else. He poured water and held the glass until I reached for it. I watched his hand instead of his face. There's a tenderness to a man's wrist when he's not performing. I didn't want to see it. I saw it anyway. "Do you want me to leave?" he asked when I drained the glass. "Yes." He didn't move. "Lorenzo." He set the glass down. "If you run tonight, I'll have to hunt you." "I don't want to hunt you." I turned my face to the wall. The first cool drift of air from the open window touched my skin and almost made me cry. "Close the door," I said. "On your way out." He stood there long enough for me to hear the blood in my ears. Then the latch clicked. Footsteps faded. I don't remember deciding to sleep. 1 second, I was cataloging the sound of the house settling. The next, I was falling into a dark water I'd been circling for years. This time, the memories didn't come like knives. They came like film, grainy, unspooling, imperfect. A kitchen with blue cabinets. My father's hands teaching me how to crack an egg with one tap, no shells. My mother's hair twisted into a knot, the loose end tucked in with a pencil. A code word for when things went bad, orchid, and how we practiced saying it like it was nothing. The ballerina with the broken arm, the laurel, and the dagger. The sound a silenced gun makes, which isn't silence at all. I woke before dawn with my cheek damp and didn't know if it was sweat or tears. The fever had broken. My body felt used and borrowed. The door was closed, but not locked. I sat up, swung my legs over the side of the bed, and stood. The room wasn't mine. Nothing in this house was mine except my name, and even that felt provisional now. The hallway outside was cool. I walked toward the front of the house because going back to the staff wing felt like pretending to be someone I had been trained out of being. At the landing, I stopped. He was there. Not in the way that made people stop talking. Not in the way that bent a room. He was sitting on the bottom step with his elbows on his knees like a man who'd been awake all night and didn't like the reasons why. He looked up when he heard me. "Elena, what do you want me to do?" I asked. The truth was a weight in my mouth. "Hate you the right way? Leave? Stay and become a story you tell yourself about mercy?" "I want you alive," he said. "After that, I will take what you give." "You don't take," I said. "You choose." "I chose the night I pulled you out of a pantry," he said. "I've been living with that choice since." The morning light didn't flatter him. It drew every sharpness on his face and made the hollows honest. He didn't look like a king. He looked like a man who had killed for a crown and learned it doesn't keep you warm. Say it plainly, I said. Why did you come after me when I ran last night? Because Raphael has men at the outer streets, and I won't put your name in their mouths, he said. Because if you leave my house, you leave it with me. Because I can't stand the thought of you bleeding somewhere I don't know the color of the floor. The confession landed between us like a weapon laid on a table. Not brandished, acknowledged. I could have told him to go to hell. I could have told him to let me go. I could have told him 100 easy lies that would make both of us smaller. I don't forgive you, I said. I didn't ask. And I'm not leaving. He didn't move, didn't smile, didn't breathe for a heartbeat that took two. Then I will make this house a place you can stand to sleep in, he said. You can't make a mausoleum into a home, I said. Watch me, he answered. I stepped past him because the only alternative was to collapse where I stood, and I had done enough collapsing in front of this man to fill a ledger. At the top of the stairs, I stopped. Lorenzo? He turned his face up. If you ever lie to me, I said, I'll find a way to pull the trigger. His nod was slow, solemn. That's fair. I went back to the staff wing. I changed into a clean uniform with hands that didn't quite obey. I tied my hair back. I stood in front of the mirror and said my name once, Elena Moreau, and watched how my mouth shaped it. It fit. It always had. It would have to. When I opened my door to start the day, a small package sat on the threshold. No card, no signature. Inside, a new plastic ballerina, cheap, pink, both arms intact. I held it until my knuckles hurt. Then I put it in my pocket and went to work. By nightfall, the city would answer the shot that had been fired in our hall. By morning, Raphael Rossi would put his teeth closer to the house. By the end of the week, someone would take something that mattered and use it like a knife. But for a handful of hours, the world shrank to linen to fold, silver to polish, a hallway to cross without listening for footsteps on the roof, and a promise made on a staircase at dawn. I would stay. Not because I forgave him, because the past had finally come back and there was nowhere else to put it down. It happened on a Thursday, the kind of night that doesn't warn you. No wind, no storm, just air that felt too still. Even the house seemed to breathe slower, as if waiting. I was polishing glassware in the east dining room, the one Lorenzo never used for actual meals, only meetings with people who deserved to be made uncomfortable. The chandeliers above were dim, soft golden light pooling on the floor. My hands moved automatically, but my mind wasn't in the room. It was stuck in a loop of fever-broken memories. Orchid, pantry, laurel, and dagger. I kept telling myself to stop remembering, but the truth is, once a memory starts bleeding through, you can't bandage it back up. I didn't hear them come in. The cloth slipped from my hand, and as I bent to grab it, something cold and sharp kissed the side of my neck. Don't scream! The voice was male, calm, European, a Roman accent wrapped in silk. That was the worst part. Calm men are the ones who have already decided what happens to you. Stand up slowly. I did. There were 3 of them. Black clothes, black gloves, no masks. They didn't need masks. No one in this house survived long enough to identify anyone outside it. The man with the knife smiled slightly, like he'd already won. Where is he? He asked. I didn't answer. Smart girl, he said. Keep it that way. A black bag swallowed my vision. Rough hands, zip ties, the sound of shoes on polished marble. Then the world tilted. When the bag came off, I was in the back of a van. My wrists burned against the plastic ties. My breathing was loud in the small space, embarrassingly human. The man across from me leaned forward. Pale skin, sharp suit, the kind of eyes that were born to sneer. "You're prettier than I expected," he said. "No wonder he kept you." "Who are you?" He laughed softly. "You really don't know. That's almost charming." He didn't tell me his name. He didn't need to. I'd heard it whispered by kitchen staff, muttered by guards, etched in quiet fear. Raphael Rossi. He leaned closer. "Do you know what happens when a king forgets he can bleed?" I said nothing. I stared at the wall behind him. If I looked at him too long, he'd win. He tilted his head, amused. "He falls, and the entire kingdom burns with him." The van jerked to a stop. I was dragged out into the night. The air outside smelled like salt and metal. The docks. I could hear water lapping against pylons. A warehouse loomed ahead, rusted metal ribs creaking in the wind. Inside, it smelled like wet concrete and gasoline. A single hanging bulb painted everything in bruised yellow light. They tied me to a chair. Classic, almost cliché, but clichés exist because they work. Raphael sat on a crate in front of me, legs crossed, elegant like a man at a piano recital. His hands were clean. His eyes were not. "You know why you're here?" he said. I shook my head. "I'm a maid. You're a pressure point." I bit down on the inside of my cheek to stop the trembling. He saw it anyway. "Lorenzo Vitale doesn't care about anyone," Raphael said. "Except you." It's poetic, isn't it? The butcher finds himself a fragile little thing to care for, and suddenly the whole kingdom has a chink in its armor. I spat blood into the floor. I don't belong to him. Raphael leaned forward. "Yes, you do. That's what makes it beautiful." Hours passed. They didn't hurt me. Not yet. That would come later if Lorenzo didn't do what they wanted. I sat there listening to the dripping pipes, the creak of the rafters. I counted my breaths like I'd done in the orphanage, when the nights were long and loud and cruel. When fear is too big to face, you make it smaller. Breath by breath, second by second. But beneath the fear was something else. A thread pulled taut through the marrow of my bones. He was coming. I didn't know how I knew. I just did. Lorenzo Vitale didn't leave things unfinished, and he would not leave me here. That thought terrified me more than the knife. Raphael returned after midnight, wearing the same suit but carrying a phone. "Your prince," he said, tossing it onto my lap. "Answer when he calls." I said nothing. A minute later, it rang. Lorenzo's voice was not calm, not cold, not careful. It was quiet, and quiet was worse. "Elena," I swallowed. "I'm here." His exhale was sharp, relief weaponized into sound. "Are you hurt?" "No." "Good." Raphael leaned close enough that I could smell his cologne. "Tell him we're ready." I didn't. He pressed the knife flat against my throat. "Raphael's here?" I whispered. "I know." "Don't." I started, but he cut me off. "I'm already on my way." The line went dead. Raphael laughed softly, pleased. "See?" Not even a second's hesitation. They moved me deeper into the warehouse, tying me to a metal beam in the center. Men checked their weapons. Someone dimmed the lights. Raphael paced like a conductor waiting for the orchestra to begin. "You'll want to pay attention, Elena," he said. "This is the part of the story where your monster shows what kind of monster he really is." The gunfire started 20 minutes later. It wasn't a brawl. It was a storm. Bullets cut through the silence in short, efficient bursts. No shouting, no panic, just precision. I felt the floor shudder beneath my feet. One of Raphael's men ran toward the door. He didn't make it far. Then the warehouse doors swung open, and Lorenzo Vitale walked in like death wearing black. His face was carved from something colder than bone. His steps were steady, deliberate. He wasn't yelling. He didn't need to. Men fell around him, and the world fell with them. Raphael drew his gun and yanked me in front of him. pressing the muzzle against my temple. "Lorenzo!" His voice cracked, not with fear, but with rage. "You've gotten sloppy." Lorenzo didn't answer. He just raised his own weapon and aimed. Straight, unshaking. "You won't shoot through her," Raphael hissed. "You need her." Lorenzo's gaze didn't flicker. "I don't miss." For one awful, suspended second, no one breathed. Then Lorenzo's men flanked the warehouse. The sound of boots. Raphael's hand tightened on my hair. "Let's end this," Raphael snarled. The shot came so fast, I didn't even hear it leave Lorenzo's gun. I just felt the warmth of Raphael's grip disappear. His body hit the ground behind me. For a second, everything blurred. The gunfire faded into ringing. I tasted copper. My knees buckled, but hands caught me before I hit the floor. His hands. "Elena." His voice was low, hoarse, not the voice of a king, but of something human. "Look at me." I did. He cut the ropes with a single stroke of a blade and pulled me against him. His heartbeat was steady, like the world hadn't just burned down around us. "I told you not to wander off," he said. I laughed. It came out broken. "You're an asshole." "Yes." "Raphael's dead." "Yes." "Good." Back at the estate, everything moved in silence. His men cleared the blood, patched bullet holes, made the night disappear like it had never happened. Lorenzo led me to his office, the same one where he'd bandaged me weeks ago. This time, he didn't ask permission. He sat me down, knelt in front of me, and wiped the blood from my face with a damp cloth. His touch wasn't soft. It was steady. I realized then that I didn't need softness from him. "Why did he want me?" I asked. "Because you're mine." I should have flinched. I didn't. "You don't own me," I said, the words trembling even as I spoke them. His hand stilled. His eyes found mine. There was no cruelty there, only something far worse, truth. "No," he said, "but they don't need to know that." Silence stretched between us like a rope. "You risked everything," I whispered. He leaned closer. "No, I did what I always do. I protect what's mine." I stared at him, at the blood on his shirt, the bruise forming along his jaw, the quiet in his voice that didn't belong to a monster, but to a man standing in the ruins of his own kingdom. "You shouldn't have come," I said. His hand touched my face, almost carefully. "I always come." Something cracked open inside me. Not soft, not gentle, but real, and that was how it happened. Not with flowers, not with whispered promises, but with blood on the floor, a corpse cooling behind us, and his hand warm against my cheek. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the floor of his office with the ballerina in my hand and the weight of everything pressing down on my lungs. He didn't touch me again. He just stood by the window, smoking in silence, as if burning away the parts of himself that might ever say the word sorry. Outside, the world was still wet from the rain. Inside, I knew something I couldn't unknow. Whatever tied me to Lorenzo Vitale wasn't simple anymore. It wasn't fear. It wasn't loyalty. It wasn't even love. Not yet. It was something deeper, darker. A bond written in gunpowder and blood. And no matter how far I tried to run from it, I already belonged to the night he walked through the warehouse door. The house did not sleep after the warehouse. It hushed. It listened. It waited. Men moved like shadows, voices clipped down to bone. The blood was scrubbed from marble, the bullet holes patched, the rugs turned so no one would see the places where the fibers had learned a new color. By morning, the estate looked the way it always did, immaculate, indifferent, unsentimental. But something had shifted, not in the walls, in me. I didn't return to the staff wing. I couldn't. The corridor was too narrow now, the ceilings too low, the silence too honest. I stood in the archway of Lorenzo's office and let my eyes adjust to the light like a creature that's learned the dark too well. He was exactly where I had left him, at the window, sleeves rolled, cigarette burning down between two fingers. Outside, the winter sky had the color of old bruises. Inside, he looked like a man waiting for a verdict he would accept without argument and survive without apology. "You should sleep," he said, not turning. "I tried," I said. "The bed remembered I was a maid." He turned then, slowly, like a tide that had decided to change its mind. His eyes moved over me, taking inventory. The dried blood at my collarbone, the split skin on my wrist where the zip ties had bitten, the ballerina in my hand. "Come here," he said. I did. He took the toy from me without comment and set it on the desk, careful as if it were fragile crystal, not cheap plastic. "You saved me." Again, his voice was quiet. "I didn't do anything." "You didn't break," he said. "That's rarer than you think." I let out a breath I hadn't noticed I was holding. "What happens now?" He studied me. Not the way he studied a ledger or a map, but the way someone reads a text they already know by heart to see if the words have changed. "Now," he said, "you stop pretending you're not already part of this." He walked to the bar, poured water instead of whiskey, and put the glass in my hand. "Rossi's death will open a door. Men who feared him will come to me. Men who loved him will come for me. There are two kinds of peace, Elena. The kind you buy and the kind you edit. Either way, someone picks up a pen, and you want me to pick up a pen? I want you where I can see you," he said, "and where they can see you." "You mean as a message? As a fact?" A pause. "You were taken to draw me out." I went. "Everyone knows it. You are no longer invisible. Use it or it will use you." Sophia's voice arrived before her body. "He's right." She stood in the doorway with a coolness I had always mistaken for distance and now understood as armor she had learned to polish every morning. "You'll need a different dress," she said simply, "and a different vocabulary." "For what?" I asked. "The council," Lorenzo said. "Noon." I laughed. It sounded like swallowed glass. "I pour drinks, Lorenzo." "Today," he said, "you pour silence." Sophia took me to a room I had never been allowed to enter. It wasn't large. Power prefers rooms that let it hear its own echo. Mirrors framed in black, a wardrobe taller than any person had a right to be. A chair in front of a low vanity whose glass made my skin look like I had been carved out of smoke. She opened the wardrobe. Silk and wool looked back. Nothing had a tag. Everything knew its purpose. "This," she said, laying a black dress across the chair. "And this." A slim jacket with seams like sentences, without wasted words. "You don't ask why?" I said. Sophia pinned my hair without looking at me in the mirror. "I've been asking men for reasons for 30 years, she said. "It taught me the value of answers that arrive without them." She buttoned the jacket at my waist. The mirror returned a stranger who looked like me if I had lived a different life in which blood never stuck to my hands and marble never learned my knees. "Shoes," Sophia said. "Will I need to run?" "No," she said, and I watched her mouth as she shaped the word. "You'll need to stand." The orchid room was not a room at all. It was an agreement. No guns, no raised voices, no lies too cheap to be useful. It sat at the spine of the house, where two hallways met like veins. The doors were heavy, the table darker than confession, the chairs arranged so no one could sit at the head and pretend they didn't. Men arrived in suits that tried to look expensive enough to matter. Marco stood at the perimeter, watchful, a human pressure gauge. I took a seat to Lorenzo's right. Not behind him, not across from him, beside him. Heads turned. Lorenzo ignored the turning. "Gentlemen," he said. The word did not fit the room. It was a courtesy he used the way a surgeon uses a cloth. News traveled faster than money. They all knew what had happened at the warehouse. They all knew I had been there and was now here. I felt their eyes try to name me. Lorenzo let them look for a count of 3. Then he began. "The vacuum Rossi left is mine to fill," he said, and the room inhaled quietly, because men who live by violence grow superstitious about the sound of confidence. "We will absorb his docks, his North Line, his import contracts. His street crews have a choice. Take our hand or fracture. If they fracture, they're fertilizer." A man with too many rings cleared his throat. "And his loyalists? They'll want his death." "They already have it," Lorenzo said. "What they want is permission to keep breathing. They'll come for it, your housekeeper." Another ventured, avoiding my eyes, "has complicated the optics." "Her name is Elena," Lorenzo said, a warning wrapped in courtesy. "She breathes because I decided to." A man laughed softly, the sound oiled and careful. "We assumed as much." I didn't move. I didn't blush. I didn't look away. I had learned here that the body is a language, and mine needed to conjugate into unbothered. "What about the West Precinct?" Marco asked, cutting the chuckle cleanly in half. "Rossi's man Fabri is already courting the police chief." "Fabri will find the chief busy," Lorenzo said. "Elena?" Heads turned again. I felt the room shift a notch, like a camera refocusing. "Chief Tadeo's daughter," I said, surprised to hear my voice come out level. "Turns 19 on Saturday. She wants a gap year in Paris. Tadeo's mortgage is still variable. If you fix it, Paris becomes maison." I met the room. "You don't need to buy the father if you can buy the future he wants to give away." Silence, then the small sound power makes when it recognizes something useful. Lorenzo didn't smile. He didn't need to. "Marco, 2 points below market. Remind him where the money comes from." A different man leaned forward. "Rossi's leftover crews. If we absorb them, we inherit their habits. We already have a discipline problem near the stadium. Then we cure it," Lorenzo said. "With bullets?" the man asked, a little too hungry. "With boredom," I said before I could stop myself. All eyes again. I kept my hands still in my lap. "Move the crews to the warehouse district for 2 weeks. Remove their small violences. Give them nothing to do but stack crates and sweep. Men who live on adrenaline die of withdrawal. They'll choose a quieter habit if you show them what their lungs can feel like when they aren't full of sirens." "Creative," someone muttered. "Effective," Lorenzo said. "Try it." He turned to me, not looking like a man seeking approval, but like a man who had already made a decision and was handing me its consequences. "The West Line is yours for a month." I blinked. "Mine?" "Marco will execute. You will decide. Consider it. Literacy." A few throats tightened around invisible objections. No one spoke them. The rules of the room were older than their egos. Business continued. Numbers, names, the choreography of money pretending to be a language more respectable than it is. I watched the way Lorenzo moved through the currents. Never pushing when gravity could do the work. Never pulling when the tide could arrange the shore. My parents had tried to bring men like this down with law and light. I was watching a different physics. When the meeting ended, chairs scraped back, voices rose to their ordinary register, and the air realized it could breathe again. Men made a point of not looking at me as they filed past. The last one, the one who had laughed, paused. "You're very composed," he said in the tone men use when they want to call you pretty, but have learned not to bleed so obviously. "For a housekeeper." "I used to be," I said. "And now? Now I set tables even you won't eat at." He made a sound that might have been a laugh and might have been a wound. "Be careful, signorina. Thrones splinter." "I know," I said. "I can feel them." When the room was empty, I stood. My legs remembered what chairs teach them and resented the reminder. Lorenzo watched me with an expression that gave nothing away and somehow gave everything. "You didn't ask me," I said. "To sit there?" "To breathe like that." "I don't ask you to breathe," he said. "I make sure there's air." "Is that what this is?" I asked. "Air? It's the cost of learning how to own your name," he said, and there was an exhaustion in it that told me he had paid twice for every time he made someone else pay once. He moved closer. Not enough to touch. Enough to teach the room it was still ours. "They'll test you," he said, quietly, with mistakes that look like accidents. "Good," I said. "I've been preparing for tests my whole life." "In orphanages," he said, "and under roofs that leak. These ones leak differently." "Then give me a bucket," I said, "or let me drown." He looked at me a long moment. "You don't drown," he said. "You calcify." "I'm still here," I said. "That means something." "It does," he said. We stood there, the table between us and the past behind us, and the future pretending to be a hallway we could only walk one step at a time. "Eat," he said at last, the tenderness hiding in command like a stowaway. "Then sleep. After that, you'll start making decisions people bleed for. And if I make the wrong ones, then I'll make sure you learn fast. Or I die." He didn't argue. "Or you die." I nodded. Fair. The West Line began at a warehouse nobody had bothered to love. Marco took me there in a car that never announced itself and parked where cameras forgot to look. He walked with the indifferent purpose of a man who never had to wonder whether a door would open for him. It understood its role. "Don't smile," he said as we crossed the floor. "It makes them think you're auditioning for forgiveness." "I'm not." "I know," he said. "But men who've learned to be dogs mistake stillness for permission." "Does that include you?" I asked. He took half a second, considered the truth, and gave it to me. "Sometimes." The foreman waited by a stack of pallets. He wore his failure like a cologne. I could smell it before he spoke. "New hobby?" he asked, eyes scanning the space around me for the invisible man he thought must be attached to any woman who bothered to show up without apologizing for it. "New literacy," I said. "Show me your roster." He handed it over with a smirk he'd learned from a father who probably died of it. I read faster than he expected. Names have a weight you can feel in your wrist when you turn the page. "You're 2 men over budget," I said, handing the clipboard back. "And the break room television is tuned to a channel that teaches them to be hungrier than their paychecks. Kill the television. Keep the men. Put the overages on the North Dock for the week." "That's not how this works," he said. "That's how it works today," I said. "Vitale? Put my name in your mouth carefully," I said. "It has teeth." He measured me for a second. Then he looked at Marco and measured the consequences. The math did not flatter him. "Fine," he muttered. "Not fine," I said. "Correct." He stared. Then something that might have been respect or a survival reflex altered the angle of his head. "Correct." We walked the floor. I listened. Men talk differently when they assume your ears are decorative. By the time we finished, I knew where the trucks slept, which doors remembered the police, and which shifts liked to pretend the clock was for someone else's body. Outside, the river answered the wind with a sound that made the city feel older than our temporary wars. "You did well," Marco said. "I didn't fall," I said. "Same thing," he said. We drove in silence for a while. "Why do you stay?" I asked finally. "With him," I added, so he wouldn't pretend not to understand. "Lorenzo saved my brother," he said, and his voice came from a part of the chest words usually avoid. "Pulled him out of a hole he dug with his own hands and didn't charge us interest for the rope." "How old were you?" "Old enough to understand debt." Marco said. Young enough to hate it. This is how I pay. Does he know you think of it that way? He doesn't need to, Marco said. He lives that way. I turned my face to the window so he wouldn't read the line my mouth made when truths I didn't ask for landed cleanly. At dusk, the house took its shape again. Staff moved along rails only we could see. The mirrors returned every glance with the neutrality of a court reporter. I should have been hungry. I wasn't. I went to the little room where he had left the ballerina and found it exactly where he had set it. I kept my hand on it until my pulse slowed. You'll wear it out, Lorenzo said from the doorway. I'm breaking it in, I said without turning. He came into the room and stopped an arm's length away. Even his stillness had an itinerary. Your parents, he said carefully, as if the sentence itself were a fragile instrument. They would have recognized you today? You didn't, I said. I did, he said. I just lied to myself longer. About what? That you could survive at my table without becoming me, he said. I faced him. I won't become you. He considered me the way he considers a move he knows is coming and can't decide whether to admire or fear. No, he said. You'll become something worse. I felt my mouth curve. Then you should be very afraid, Lorenzo. He did not smile. I am. The quiet put its hand between our ribs and waited. Tell me the rule, he said at last. Don't lie to me. The other. Protect the name. The other. Make decisions people bleed for. He shook his head. The first rule is this. If they force you to choose between being loved and being feared, choose neither. Be the one who can end the room with a sentence. And what sentence ends a room? The truth, he said. It didn't sound like philosophy. It sounded like a confession. He lifted his hand, paused, and then set it on my jaw. An owner's touch turned respectful. I let him, not because I had to, because I wanted to understand the language we had been writing on each other in blood and silence since the night he said my name through a cracked door. Sleep, he said. I have decisions to make, I said. You can make them in the morning, he said. Or you can make them now and spend the night learning what regret weighs. Do you regret? Constantly, he said. I just don't revise. I nodded once. Then I'll wait. He let his hand fall. The space between us remembered how to be air again. He left without looking back. He never looked back. That was my job. I picked up the ballerina and put her in the drawer beside my bed. Pink plastic, in a house that preferred its artifacts heavier. The night stretched out like a road no one sane would walk barefoot. I lay on top of the covers and listened to the house make its small, human sounds. The pipes speaking in the walls. A door considering whether to protest. A distant laugh turned down before it grew teeth. I thought of thrones and splinters. Of crowns that cut skin where they sit, and men who wear them until their skulls forget they were ever soft. I thought of my parents and the kitchen with the blue cabinets and the code word that meant, don't ask, run. And then I thought of Lorenzo Vitale, who didn't ask, didn't run, and still somehow found a way to carry me out of a burning room into one that kept trying to set itself on fire in more expensive ways. Morning would come with ledgers and maps, and a test someone would pretend wasn't a test. I would pass it or I would learn. Both were a kind of blood. For now, I closed my eyes and let the house breathe for me. I had chosen a crown. It fit like a bruise. It shone like a blade. And for the first time, I understood why a king sleeps with one hand open. Not to catch what he is owed, but to feel what he cannot afford to drop. 6 months later, the house no longer smelled like bleach. It smelled like power. The kind that doesn't need to announce itself. It simply exists. The walls no longer pressed in on me like they used to. They bent. They listened. The staff didn't look through me anymore. They looked to me. They called me Signora Moreau now, though Lorenzo never asked them to. The name floated through corridors like smoke through velvet curtains. It was both crown and chain. I wore it like I had learned to wear everything in this house, perfectly still, from maid to whisper, from whisper to shadow, from shadow to La Rosa. I was standing on the balcony outside Lorenzo's study when the first snow of the year began to fall. Not much, just soft flakes that disappeared the moment they touched the marble. Beneath me, the driveway was lined with black cars. The council had arrived early tonight. They always did now. I touched the edge of the railing with my fingertips. It wasn't the same balcony where I had first seen him standing months ago, tired and alone in the dark. But it felt like it. So much of this house had been rewritten, and so much of me with it. Inside, the air was warm. The meeting room was lit low. Not bright, never bright. Power likes half light. It hides the things we don't want to look at directly. Lorenzo was already at the table, a half smile cutting across his face like something he hadn't meant to wear. He wasn't the man I had met that first night, and maybe I wasn't the girl he found in the hallway. We didn't belong to beginnings anymore. We belonged to aftermath. Rossi's territory folded, Marco was saying. Fabri's men signed last night. The port runs clean. Lorenzo poured himself a drink. Of course it does. And the cops? I spoke before anyone else could. They're bought. Nicely. We'll raise their salary by 12% through the shell accounts. No cash. They'll think they found a crack in the system. They'll never realize they are the system. Lorenzo didn't correct me. He didn't have to. This was my territory now. Not the docks, not the warehouses. The silence between his orders. The cracks that used to swallow me now belonged to me. Sophia entered with a tray, set down the glasses, and gave me the same look she always did. It wasn't approval. It wasn't warning. It was acknowledgement. The kind reserved for people who have earned a seat they were never supposed to touch. I'd spent my whole life being told I was small. Then one day, I stopped listening, and everyone else did too. After the meeting, Lorenzo and I stood by the long window overlooking the courtyard. The snow was still falling, soft as if the city hadn't learned to bite yet. They're learning to fear you, he said quietly. I tilted my head. You sound proud. I am. I turned to him. That should scare you. He laughed, that rare, quiet sound like he almost didn't remember how. It does. Lorenzo stepped closer. His hand brushed my wrist, not claiming, not demanding, just reminding. This was how we existed now. A storm and its eye. You've changed, he said. I became what you built, I said, and what you couldn't control. He didn't deny it. They call me La Rosa in the streets now. The Rose. Pretty, delicate, beautiful. What they don't say is that my thorns grow exactly where they reach for me. It happened near midnight. Marco came to my door, his expression tight, his hand resting too close to his gun. There's someone at the gate, he said. Says he knew Victor Moreau. For a moment, the world stopped breathing. I followed him downstairs, through the hall that once terrified me, through the iron doors that had always been his. Now, they opened for me too. The man standing in the snow wasn't remarkable. Gray coat, gloves, hat pulled low. But there was something about the way he stood, a soldier's stillness. I knew it before he said a word. Who are you? I asked. He took off his hat. David Mercer, counterintelligence. I served with your father. My heart didn't skip. It stopped. Lorenzo appeared behind me, silent as he always was when the world tilted. I didn't look at him. This was my past. The man's voice was roughened by years of smoke and silence. Your father saved my life, he said. Your mother, too. I spent years trying to find you. Why now? I asked. Because, he said, pulling a thin envelope from his coat, someone else is looking too. He held it out to me. Inside, a photo. My parents, me, and a man I didn't recognize. Sharp suit, smile like a blade. Lorenzo's hand tightened on the back of my chair before I could even sit. Who is he? I asked. Another player, David said. Someone who wants what Lorenzo built. And he's not playing by the old rules. Lorenzo's voice came low, steady. Name. Adrian Vale. I'd never heard it before, but something in the way Lorenzo's jaw clenched told me he had. Later, after David was escorted out and Lorenzo sent half the house into motion like chess pieces, we stood alone in the war room. A map sprawled across the table, red lines creeping toward the center like veins. Another one, I said. There's always another one, he replied. The rain had stopped. The snow hadn't. Do you regret it? I asked. Making me part of this. He didn't answer right away. He never rushed the things that mattered. I don't regret you, he said finally, but the world that made me. His silence was the answer. I walked back to the balcony alone, the cold cutting against my skin like clarity. Once upon a time, I had been a child hiding in a pantry. Then a maid polishing silver in a house built on fear. Then a girl in love with a man who destroyed everything she came from. And now I was the woman people whispered about when they didn't think I could hear. I touched the iron railing. The snow collected on my gloves and melted fast. Behind me, Lorenzo's footsteps. I didn't need to turn to know it was him. The way the air shifted was enough. Tell me, he said softly. Do you hate me? I closed my eyes. The answer wasn't simple. It never had been. Yes, I whispered. And no. He came closer. That's how kingdoms survive. His breath warmed the side of my neck. Not a lover's gesture, not a threat. Something in between. The place where everything dangerous lives. They're coming, I said. I know. You're not invincible. He laughed low. Neither are you. Maybe not. I turned then, meeting his gaze, steady, dark, unflinching. But they'll learn my name before they kill me. His hand touched my jaw, like it always did. Not a claim, a vow. They already know, he said. That night, the snow kept falling, and so did the world we thought we owned. But I wasn't afraid anymore. I didn't need to be saved. I wasn't the girl in the hallway or the maid at the door. I was La Rosa, the rose that bloomed in the empire's ash, and the next war was already on its way.